Welcome everybody to this webinar on overcoming hierarchy, Sociocracy for All. It's legally a nonprofit in Massachusetts. We're operating basically globally at this point because we do a lot of things online. We offer resources, online training, in-person training, consulting, and we are a community of people who are working around using or interested in sociocracy. Our mission is making sociocracy accessible. Ideally, we would want everybody to at least know that this option exists and what it involves so that people can be intentional and in choice about how they govern themselves. A few things of how to learn in case you're inspired and you do not know about the options of how to learn what we offer, Sociocracy for All, to learn sociocracy. The options here, these are the typical suspects. So one is our online training. One round is about to start now. So that would be too hard to hop on, I guess. And then the next time will be in fall. We offer it like 3 or 4 times a year. In the meantime, there is a self-study curriculum, video-based with articles that go along with it. Everything all set for groups who want to meet and learn together. We're doing more webinars like this one. We do webinars all the time. And then there's the book. And those two are related this month. And that's what I was alluding to. Because what we're doing right now is a whole series of webinars. And if you look at it, you see that some of them have already passed. We are now here. This is sorted by date. We are now here. And those are the ones that are still coming up. And it's all to celebrate the release of this book. Now I think it's a good time to welcome Greg, don't you think?
And who are we?
Oh, who are we? Good point. Thank you. Maybe we should say that first. So I'm going by 2 names at this point. Jennifer is my legal name. Ted is what people call me these days on my request. And this is Jerry Koch Gonzalez. We two co-founded Sociocracy for All that we call SOFA. While we're talking about names, we should say SOFA too, because that's what we say. Anything else you want to say about yourself?
Well, besides doing Sociocracy, I am a trainer in nonviolent communication as well. And that's how I met Greg, I don't know, 8, 10 years ago? I don't know how long it's been, many years back, when we both participated in a intensive training with Marshall Rosenberg and Mickey Castan and a number of other folks who were in that room. So we've kept a little bit of track of each other over the years, but it was great to then come back in touch with Greg. Know that he's been working the combination, the integration of NVC and sociocracy in his work, and we really wanted to hear more about that, and that's why we invited Greg to come here.
And before we hand it over, just let me give you just 3 sentences about what we're going to do today. So this was our sort of preamble things. Now we're going to hand it over to Greg, and then it's going to evolve more into a conversation, first between the 2 of us and Greg, just to keep it a little contained at the beginning. You're welcome to give your questions and comments in the chat, but don't overdo it because it tends to distract people. And then we're going to open it up to everybody, okay? So you will have your chance to speak and comment and ask. All right? Anything before we hand it over?
Oh,
okay.
Greg.
Greg.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Jerry. So I'm delighted to be with you and appreciate the invitation for this webinar. I have been so thrilled seeing what the 2 of you are doing through your organization. So I love the way you're teaching it, very practical, hands-on, and you're building all of these beautiful tools around sociocracy. So bravo. And now your book, which I'm also eager to see. So I'm excited to talk about the topic that you all have put forward. I guess what I'd like to do is just set the stage so that you all understand a little bit about the work that I've done, about a little bit about me as we get started here, and then I would love for Jerry and Ted to sort of lead the questions around things that they see as relevant and interesting on this. So I think I'm going to share my screen as we do all this. Screen. And play. All right, I'm hoping you see a single slide now. Is that correct? All right, good. Well, I put this up just to remind me why we're here. This is the advertisement that Ted and Jerry put out. I'm intrigued by the title, Overcoming Hierarchy. Ted and Jerry, I hope you'll come back to that. There's a lot just in that title, I think, that we can kind of mine out of that. But you know, in particular, I want to share with you the work I do. It's focused on, I principally work with workplace culture. So I would say 90% of the clients I work with are either for-profits or nonprofits. It's about the culture within their organizations, and that for one reason or another, they want to transform that culture to be something beyond what it is today. And so my work is to support them in that, both in awareness of where they are in their culture and where they want to go with that, and then how might they get there. I support them through typically conversations. My work is principally consulting. I support them in having a cross-functional sort of conversation around the things that matter, so that they can discover their own path forward. So I do consulting where I have no answers, but I hold process for you. I support you in you discovering the answers as to how to move forward through supporting you in connecting to yourself and connecting to others in terms of what's going on. All right, so with that, I would like to just introduce you to just a little bit here, just to put Sociocracy, which I more frequently call it now the Sociocratic Circle Method, or SCM, just in my day-to-day work. But I want you to see how Sociocracy and NVC show up in my work around creating culture. So notice the first thing is I create a culture where people matter. That's really important to me, where people matter. So all of my work is grounded in human needs, which I see as the very tangible expression of people mattering. That if people matter, then human needs are seen, they're valued, there are structures and processes that support meeting those human needs. So that it's not just lip service to, yeah, we care about the people, it's actually tangibly engaging with people and creating structures around people that demonstrates that people matter, that their values are being seen and heard. So just a little bit here, there's actually quite a bit I do with this particular slide in a variety of ways, but for this call, I just want you to hear, I'm very clear what I mean by culture. It is the visible behaviors that are occurring in any group of people. Whatever, it's not what's on the wall, it's not what's printed in the handbook, it's how people are showing up and how they're engaging and interacting with one another. And very often I'm called in because there's something about those interactions, something about the way people are engaging with each other that is something other than what people are wanting in that culture. So there's something not working out. I often use a simple example that Sam goes on in the meeting and everybody's tired of Sam. Sam gets up to speak in the meetings, eyes roll. They talk around the water cooler. When will Sam ever just shut up? You know, we've heard so much from Sam. We are ready to hear from somebody else in the meetings. So it's very easy to point fingers with that kind of language. We're all pointing the fingers at Sam. We're saying, boy, it would be a lot better if only Sam would change or if Sam wasn't here. So many, many times where I'm called into an organization, it starts with something like that, maybe something more significant than how I just described Sam. When I first did work in NVC, I spent a lot of time here. I did a lot of mediation, trying to get Sam to talk to whoever he's having problems with or whatever the case might be. But I quickly learned it changed nothing, that whatever the problems were, they keep showing up around that. And that, in fact, the kind of source of culture, what drives culture, are two different pieces that are relatively hidden. They're not in full view. And so one of those is how the organization itself holds us. And so, for example, how leadership shows up. If leadership shows up in a very strong power over way, then it will instill fear in the people within that organization at whatever level that leader is showing up that way. And when we're fearful, we have certain behaviors. And if that same person was put in a different culture, they would show up differently. So what I've discovered is that very much of the behavior, in fact, is a direct consequence of the very structures, processes, culture that people find themselves in. We do the best we can to thrive, to survive, given whatever culture that we're in. And so I just bring attention that if we want to change the culture, if we want to change the way people interact, then we need to change how that we is holding us. What's the governance? What's leadership look like? Are we aligned around shared values, around a shared purpose? Those are the things that begin to hold us with clarity and begin to create a different culture that we live with. So, and the Sociocratic circle method, or sociocracy, then becomes one of these structures that an organization could implement, a different structure. Because a key problem that all organizations have is perhaps a lack of imagination of what other structure could we use than the one that we have. We have legal structures that hold us. We have Robert's Rules of Order. We have all these things that have held us because that's the way organizations are created. That's the way you hold a meeting. And there's not an alternative for people there. And those structures do not hold human needs very well. That's their problem. It's very easy for powerful people to get their way within those kinds of structures. In fact, they're set up that way. They're set up for powerful people to get what they want. I tried to talk to an attorney. I did talk to an attorney one time about setting up a different structure in my organization. It was a sociocratic structure. And he was puzzled. And he finally says, you know, I don't think I can do this. My role as an attorney is to hold the needs of the owner and be sure that the owner gets whatever he wants. And your structure completely undermines that. And I'm not sure how to do that. So we agreed that that relationship probably wasn't going to go further if he couldn't figure that out. All right, the other part that I work with in terms of creating the structure is how am I showing up within that context? When Sam gets up in the meeting and starts talking and doesn't stop, what do I do? How do I show up in response to Sam? Again, do I roll my eyes? Do I take out my cell phone and start looking at that? Do I become disconnected from the meeting? Do I turn to the person next to me and say, there he goes again? You know, will we ever, you know, get by Sam? Will we ever have a meeting that's actually worthwhile? Things of that nature. In which case, I'm beginning to contribute to a dysfunctional culture that's still, it's actually getting further from where we would like it to be. So these are the two places where the Sociocratic circle method can show up in my work, and the we side of this, how the we holds us. It gives an opportunity for a new type of governance, if that's what the organization is seeking, for a new way to make group decisions. So some very specific things that we're doing a lot of, a different way to hold meetings or to make decisions within our meetings. And on the I side of this, how I show up, NVC becomes another structure that the organization can embrace, so that with a skill set and a mindset of NVC, I'm able to show up in a way that I'm valuing myself, I'm valuing my colleagues, I'm valuing the organization. And I can speak to that. I can hold those needs in my interactions and conversations. You know, maybe very specifically, I can give feedback to a colleague within my organization when I see a behavior that seems out of alignment with the culture, and I can give that feedback without blame. I can express it in a way that what I'm observing seems out of alignment with the core values, perhaps, that we have all agreed to. And would you help me understand, you know, why you just did what you did? I'm curious. I want to understand what's going on. So it gives us a way to engage with people, to hold care for them, while we also are very clear about things like accountability, giving honest feedback to each other to build an organization with what we have. All right, so this is the structure. I'm also almost always start at some point with clients, some awareness of this. so that the work I do is either structurally at the organizational level, this we side of things, which by and large the leadership controls. The leadership makes typically the decisions around all of these structures, processes, values, roles. And I'm working with the organization as how individuals, particularly leaders, are showing up within that, so that they are better able to connect, to hear, to engage with the people that they're working with. All right, I want to say a little bit about how I met Sociocracy in the same context here. That I actually, in my own organization, I had a IT business, information technology business. We had, I don't know, 50 employees or so at the time. And I was embracing, I just met NVC. It was like an eye-opener to me. It's what I was really looking for in my organization, that I thought would really support people in getting value, of being appreciated, of being seen within the business. And so I held in a needs sort of way, you know, how can we get rid of power over in our organization? What would that look like? If I want to value people, as long as we have power over, then there's a lot of inherent issues. And so I just came up with, if it doesn't land in an individual, it must land in a group of people. And so I created things within my organization, not knowing anything about sociocracy, that became a series of overlapping circles as to how we organized ourselves. And that the power was within the circles, and the circles empowered the people within those circles. And it worked quite well in our early days. And at some point I discovered Sociocracy. And so I immediately trusted it because it was so close to what we had organically created in our organization. And yet Sociocracy was so much more robust. So that I then integrated that. I did not have double linking, for instance. I had not clarified consent in the same way that Sociocracy did, though we had something similar to it. So I began to see a very potent structure that could hold us, and most importantly, can hold needs. So I'm showing you this slide because in my sense, this is what Sociocracy, it's why it's meaningful to me in the work that I do, is that Sociocracy is a much better structure to hold human needs than the typical organizational structures that we encounter. In particular, the sense that no one is ignored was a designing principle, in fact, from Gerard Hindenburg when he created it. Sort of the kind of motivating reason to come up with Sociocracy. And it's extraordinarily powerful, this sense of inclusion, that idea of being seen, of being included in decisions that impact you. And there are others. So I kind of held this central, the second column here, as sort of rules of thumb to meet the needs that you see in red on the left-hand side. But I wanted structures and systems where no one is ignored, where there were no hidden agendas and no secrets. I wanted an organization where that transparency was the norm, and if you weren't going to be transparent, then we gave a reason why we weren't going to be transparent. But de facto, everything is transparent unless we have a clear need for it not to be transparent, and we're communicating that need. And then the no power over, which led me to some kind of circles, to groups of people holding power and delegating that, and honoring then the autonomy, the decision-making of each person within the organization. And no blame was another rule of thumb, which NVC gave very potent tools for. Okay, so let it sit there. I just wanted to give you a sense of the work I'm doing, how it is about creating culture where the sociocracy processes become a structure within that I use in a variety of ways, or I may not use at all, depending on the client that I'm working with. And NVC becomes a personal skill set and a mindset shift as well, so that people are showing up differently within their organizations. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing. What else can I share? Jennifer, Jerry?
Can you maybe just walk us through like a typical arc of encountering a client, and like it be a composite picture of a client, and how you wind up going through the various stages of working with them at the different levels and the different aspects of structure or personal development, etc.
Yeah, so every client is unique, but I can describe a process that I think that is fairly common among the clients I work with. So partly, I'd say one of the things that bring clients to me, I think one of the most common things is that they're not living the values that they want within their organization. I particularly get this a lot in nonprofits. Nonprofit will be doing beautiful work out in the community, but if you go into their offices, that is not going the way that they would like it to, that they are not engaging with one another the way they want. So they're really yearning and longing for, how can we live those values that we're so good at expressing externally? How can we live them internally? So that might be a motivating reason why someone would come and approach me. Or it could be a very specific problem of, I had one time an executive director of a nonprofit, she approached me, she said, if this doesn't change soon, I'm quitting. If your executive director is ready to quit, what's going on? But she described it as a toxic environment, that just not getting along with a person, there wasn't respect and things of that nature. So it's just encouragement that she wanted to see a shift in culture. And again, that's a sign that a culture is not working, is when people who are competent want to leave, that they do not find it as a happy home to engage in. So so the shorthand version of the typical engagement is I start with initial conversation with whoever the highest leader is that is open to that conversation. Ideally, the executive director, the CEO. And I want to hear, so what's going on? Why is it that you want to talk to me? What's the presenting situation? And in that conversation, help support them in clarifying what are your goals for the organization, and how, if we were to create a short-term project, what would you want to have happen in that project? What would your goals be if we were to work on this over the next 4 to 6 months? And then based on that, I'll come back to them with, here's a work plan about how I see that this could happen. And very typically in that work plan, there's some discovery mode. It's a discovery for me, but ultimately it's a discovery for the people who are within the organization. So I use such tools as a culture values assessment, a very simple tool to take, but one that gives a lot of information where people are talking about, here's my description of my personal values, here's my description of the current culture that we're working in right now, and here's my description of the kind of culture I would like to work in. And we get that from all the people who fill it out, and then we have a composite of what do the personal values look like for most of the people within that organization, how are they describing the current culture, and what kind of culture would they like. So that's an example of a discovery tool that I would then bring back to the client at a later time. I very often also do interviews with at least a subset of people to hear more in-depth information about what's working well at the organization, what would they like to be different. And so I take the results of my interviews and of this assessment, and it's kind of leading up to a day or maybe a day and a half where we have a very pointed day of conversations around either the entire organization if it's small, or a cross-section of the organization where we have people at multiple levels, multiple roles, multiple departments, all in the room together, and where I have taken the survey, the cultural values assessment, and the interviews, and I'm bringing into the room then, in part of this discovery, I want them to see themselves. It's sort of a moment of empathy that they can see how they perceive themselves in a way that they've never been able to before, because they're seeing the collective view, not only how they're seeing it, but how others are seeing it. And they have a chance to engage in that. And there are key themes that emerge from that kind of discovery process. And then we spend the rest of the time engaging in conversations around those key themes, which very likely are things that are very challenging for them to have conversations about. They're very charged. They're hard to have conversations around. So they have facilitated conversations there. So in that, they discover, what is it we want to work on? We have the results of the assessment. We have the results of our conversations. And depending on what that is, then they begin to plan how they want to move forward after they've had this opportunity for the conversations in a facilitated way. The beauty of that one-day event is that people often for the first time have a sense of being heard in ways that they haven't been heard before. They have a chance of hearing other people that perhaps they had either no connection with, or they had stories about why they would never want to have a conversation with them. And yet they're in the same room together and they hear them and they hear, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that about you. I didn't know what a challenge you're holding. I had never heard or seen that before. So a lot of connection, a lot of being heard, very frequently a fair bit of tears around that kind of emotional connection in seeing each other. And this might be an insurance company I'm talking about, right? So a group that's not used to being, I'll say, emotional with each other in the midst of that process. And from there, it can go a bunch of different directions, Jerry, just in answer to your question. Sometimes, in fact, very frequently, communication is an issue. So we may have some communication training that follows on to that. They may want their meetings to be reworked, in which case I may bring in some sociocratic processes around new ways that they could be hosting their meetings. So it really depends on the results where it goes. But then I'm bringing in tools to address and support them in moving forward toward the culture they want to build and whatever other goals they have built into the program that are going on there. So there's no fixed solution at that point. It is entirely dependent on where the client is and what they're ready for. I feel it's vital. When I first started doing this work, I was so impassioned about it. I thought, doesn't everybody want to have power with leadership and have these wonderfully beautiful connected cultures? And I realized after a while that the answer was no. I did, but not everybody was where I was. So I was sort of on an impassioned mission, and I kept seeing it through my lenses rather than through the client's lenses. So I'm very clear now. I want to meet the client where they are, and I want to advance them to the next step that they are ready for, whatever that looks like, and that there's no right answer. I'm not steering them toward a path that I want. I'm supporting them to take the first or the next few steps in the path that they want to achieve their culture that they're after. So it's always a discovery, and it's always somewhat unique.
I was just reflecting on the notion that supporting them on the path that they want to choose would also be the path that I want to choose, because I want autonomy and I want to support. And if they want to take that path towards greater autonomy, greater shared power, more connection, that they will choose it on their own without me pushing at them.
Yes. One of the unique challenges of working in the workplace versus going to an NVC workshop where everybody chose to be there because they want to learn NVC. There's not one soul in a company typically that wants to learn NVC or wants to learn sociocracy. They didn't come there for that. They came there to do their job. So it's a matter of engaging with them in a way that they're ready to take whatever those next steps are. It's a very different audience than a group of self-selected people that came for self-development or came for their own learning about how they want to contribute into the organization. So it has its own challenges, which means you won't have everyone on board. And ultimately what matters is you have some critical mass on board. You work with the people that do get it, that do want to go deeper, that do want to understand, and that they value why you're doing it. So.
And so that's one of the dances right there. You're moving ahead with a critical mass while hoping that the sort of I could care less neutrals or the opposers are not getting in the way of the forward progress. I mean, I don't know if there's tensions around that. What advice or what observations have you noticed about what's effective at dealing with sort of those, you've got the three categories: people who are ready to move forward, people who go like, and the people who are actually actively resisting and trying to undermine because in some way they feel threatened or scared or whatever.
Right. Again, there's a variety of ways that shows up. For the most part, I want to honor the people who are, perhaps skeptics or worse. I very frequently just engage with them, and essentially it's, you're not trusting that what you know so far about this process is really valuable, that it's something that you could see yourself using within the organization. And I generally say, well, until that happens, I honor that you're going to make different choices. And I would just invite you to be open as you see this evolve and develop, that, perhaps something there will be of value. But I very much want people only to move forward when they experience value. I want you to pick the most valuable way forward that you know right now. And if this isn't it, then don't join the group that's going to learn more about whatever it is, NVC or Sociocracy. Don't join it yet. Join it when you're ready. And let's work with those that are ready. So for instance, in Sociocracy, you need a facilitator, a log keeper, you need people holding the meeting, holding the process. So find the few that are ready, support them in learning those skills so that they can begin to hold the group in a way. If it's around NVC, then again, it's also people who value how that connection can happen, even in points of conflict. And you support the few that are ready, you give them deeper skills, and then you let, the proof is in the pudding. What happens now in the organization now that people have these skills? What happens when you have a meeting that's organized sociocratically and every person gets to be heard in the meeting, and that every person is a part of the consent decision that happens? Or you do an election and you have a process that holds people in terms of why I picked this person, and that you're moving toward a way of selecting people that, for me, is one of the most beautiful ways of selecting people for anything in the sociocratic election process, so that you let the experience of having needs met support people in moving deeper into the process. And that's generally what happens. But it may take, I'm remembering a client, someone very aggressively antagonistic to what was going on for a very long period of time. It was a couple of years into this project. I actually worked with this company about 5 years. Even things like they created a board because of it, and I was on the board, and the board operated sociocratically. It was really beautiful. But this one woman, about 2 years into the engagement, she invited me to lunch. And I thought, that's a little odd. I don't know what's going on here. But as I went to lunch with her, she shared with me how what she had been learning at work about NVC and about connecting, how it had made such a big difference in her connection to her kids, and that it really changed their relationship. And she wanted me to know that. So had nothing to do with work at that point, but something had really happened. I think she was really struggling with her relationship with at least one of her children, and that something she had picked up through the workplace really had a major impact on that. So she invited me to lunch to thank me for just the work that had been going on in the workplace that ultimately had this impact in her personal life. And she became very fully on board with the work. So, when we get our needs met, when we're heard, when we're included, and we can't help but be impacted by that. And I think once that happens a little bit, then the resistance is diminished and the trust starts to grow, because we really like that. We really want that. Once you've tasted the fruit of being included, of being heard, those kinds of human experiences, and you get those needs met, you don't want to leave a space where that's going to happen. So that's very powerful.
I loved your example of how what this woman learned really from her workplace really then found its way into her family life, because what it shows to me is just the the bigger umbrella of culture, or I don't know what to call it, but how culture change really affects every area of our lives, and that many of those tools or approaches don't apply to only one. They always carry over. Like Sociocracy, the same thing, NVC, the same thing. My entryway into the whole thing was actually parenting in NVC. And then Sociocracy came later. It's just interesting how it all seems to express something very basic and very close, or maybe identical with human nature, that then goes everywhere. And if that's okay with your train of thought right now, I would love for you to hear from you how you would describe what NVC and Sociocracy share, or maybe either depending on how you hold it, either conceptually or what it does for people. Either way would be interesting for me.
Well, I think it's in the same area that I was just speaking to. So to me, they both hold human needs in incredible ways that our normal way of communication does not, and our normal way of organizing and making decisions do not. So we can hold them in contrast to kind of the norm of what's going on there. Fundamentally, we live in a world structurally and in communication that's fear-based. And so we're often in a reactive place talking to each other. It's very easy that we engage through fear. And both of these structures are designed to take us to a place of trust. They're designed to activate the different portion of our brain, not our amygdala and our brainstem, our reactive reptile brain, but in fact to bring our prefrontal cortex back into motion so that we are engaging around what matters, human needs, and bringing those into the forefront. So I think fundamentally, they are tools to connect us to our own humanity and to each other that way, different ways. What I love about Sociocracy, and I frequently tell people who are working with it, the beauty of a structure versus a skill like NVC is a structure, just follow the structure. Just follow the process. And if you follow the process, the structure itself does the heavy lifting, right? You will include people if you just do a round. Just do a round. Be sure you start someplace and you include every person in it. You don't have to be thinking inclusion. You just do the process. And if you do it, then you will be holding and modeling inclusion by the very process of doing a round. If you do a consent round, then you're modeling that every voice matters, that we will not do a decision unless we have consent by all those involved. So another example of inclusion and also autonomy, that we are going to make the decisions collectively that impact us collectively. Of course, I've got human needs colored glasses, but to me, they are both fundamentally very powerful human needs holding tools, structures, processes that enable us to live in a world where people matter. Because if we're valuing human needs, we're valuing people in very specific and direct ways. Does that answer it, Jerry?
Okay, yeah. I'm just reflecting on sort of, different things about my experience, that working with organizations sometimes where motion within the organization is pretty challenged, but the people are going home and having changes in their church group or in their families or in other aspects that are more open to change than the particular organization in which they are suffering.
Yeah. I just thought of an example this morning. There's this interesting blend between NVC and Sociocracy. So I was with a group of nurses this morning, and they just announced a structural change. They're going to move from 8-hour shifts to 12-hour shifts. And it's a big change, and it affects people's lives and things like that. So some of the beauty of what I saw this morning was that the director of nursing did a round with people to see how they felt about this change that was coming on. And so each person got to voice into that. That's a simple little structure that's taken from Sociocracy, but very powerful. And of course, with NVC combined into there, then you can hear what they're saying and meet it with empathy rather than resistance or defense or things of that nature. So, and because people were emotional, the tissues were flowing all over the place as people were imagining. Single mothers, how am I going to work 12-hour shifts when I have kids in school on a regular schedule, things of that nature. But so the room was able to hold that. So in the workplace, you had 5 people in tears, just in different parts of this, and there was a space to hold it, and everyone got to connect with it, and you found people supporting each other in the group. So while it was emotional, I even talked to the director of nursing afterwards. I said, so how do you feel? I said, I think I want to vomit, is what she said. I said, tell me more. What's going on in you? But it was her seeing the pain stimulated by the change, and she has a lot of care for those people. So it just upset her that she's made a choice that she sees as stimulating so much pain. And I said, so that's beautiful too, just that you do care, that it does impact you, and that you can also, express that and be held in that context as well. So, we can't change the emotional impact of hard decisions that need to be made for a variety of reasons, but we can create a container that can hold the humanity that goes on around those moments. And so we can better connect with people and support them as they're working through that. And that's human. In fact, we want to keep making the decisions we need to make, even if they are hard. That's something very real in the workplace. I often talk about the fierceness of purpose and of being the director of nursing and of making the choices that the director of nursing needs to make for the success of the organization, and this quality of empathy and care that you hold for the individuals, the kind of vertical, fierce passion versus the horizontal, warm compassion that we hold for each other. And that we want, it's a both and in the workplace is what this process invites us, not an either or. Because we've worked in fierce, disconnected workplaces and they're no fun. And if you just have a compassionate workplace with lots of connection, well, it's fun for a while, but nothing gets done. So,
yeah, I'm certainly, I remember years back when I tried to organize a nonviolent communication chapter, and it was hard to make decisions because everybody just kept on being triggered and dealing with feelings and needs and feelings, but no organizational motion. And on the other hand, working with organizations that were trying to be sociocratic, but didn't really have space for the emotional life of people. And so they just kept, it wasn't fun. It wasn't inviting to people.
Right. I'm remembering very distinctly my own learning of NVC that I spent years and years, my early years. So that started around 2000 when I started into NVC, when I brought it into my own organization. And I needed it because I needed to learn empathy and all those kinds of things. All right. My daughters have no matter what I do to my phone, I'm always open to my daughters. And so we had all these beautiful connections in NVC practice groups, and so over and over again, beautiful, warm, and I got tired of it. It's like there's got to be more. And what I was missing was this sort of fierce, passionate, purposeful motion. And so I began to develop that. And in a workplace environment, you must bring the fierce passion of purpose along with the gentle connectedness of empathy and compassion, or it won't work. It won't hold water. It won't be meaningful. It won't be relevant to that group. And in fact, it's the beauty of holding those both together that I think is very potent. Mm-hmm. And I like it. I'm reading books right now about Vikings, and I love it. They were brutal and harsh, but boy, were they passionate. So,
what I love about the NVC and Sociocracy is what I think of as a context of they're both really pointing in the direction of revolutionary nonviolence, in the traditions of Jesus and Gandhi, etc. Inevitably, if you take the full understanding of either or both, it requires a completely fundamental change in organizations. So I'm curious, you know, that aspect. I've recently worked with a hospital as well, with the nurses and doctors and midwives, and the edicts come down from high above that come out of some real fear around the economic survival of the institution. But they are still, you know, the institutions are living in the violent world, in the competitive, you know, us or them kind of world. And then within, we try to do the best we can. But you take this stuff to the ultimate point, and at some point, the power over has to stop. You know, or how do people deal with, oh, we're living in contradiction. You know, what Greg is bringing us here is in contradiction to some of the fundamental aspects of this organization. You know, that decisions need to be made, and some people have to follow the orders, period, or you'll be out of a job. You know, no, we don't have a sociocratic hospital system worldwide, you know, or countrywide, et cetera.
Right.
You know, your thoughts or reflections on any of that?
Yeah, so I'm hearing, you know, being embedded in a larger system that's still very functioning at power over level, power over, power under level. You know, that's the reality in many workplaces, you know, where you work. So you can do what you can with that, you know, I think to stay connected, to create power with environments. I've certainly worked with organizations where I'm working with a team within a large organization, and there's a lot that can happen at the team level, but you're still embedded in a larger structure. So you do what you can in that, I think, so that you can live it in fairly strong ways within the team, but you're always bumping up against, you know, the other walls of what's going on there. Unless you're working with the top level and the leadership is on board, it's always going to have a bit of that discomfort feeling, I think, around that. So, I mean, I don't have a response. There are certain ways that we can show up and stay connected in the midst of that kind of stuff coming at us. There are responses to that. You know, ultimately what matters and what NVC is so good about is even when people come at you with fear, how am I holding that within myself? Am I able to work through my own stimulation of fear and connect to needs within myself so that I'm grounded, so that I'm actually living that moment from a grounded place that may be unpleasant. I may be feeling emotions that are painful to me, but at least I'm not in a reactive place. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and it's a much sweeter place to live, those of you who have worked with NVC, to transform that moment into that. But, you know, all of this is about, NVC is about changing oneself, not changing other people. So we learn to change how we respond to and how we receive what's going on around us. And perhaps in our changing, it has an impact on the world around us, and it changes, however slightly, to meet us there. And I think that does happen. But we're unlikely to transform large, complex systems with heavy power over. In fact, the structure will overwhelm no matter what you bring to it, ultimately, is my experience of that. Structure wins. You can bring all the sweet NVC you want to, but if the structure doesn't shift, you're swimming upstream all the time. And the moment you relax, the stream carries you downstream. So, you know, I guess there's part I want to communicate that, you know, I've worked with a lot of organizations. That organization I worked 6 years for ultimately kind of let go of some of this stuff and then was sold. And so it all kind of dissipated through the process. Mm-hmm. So I've seen sort of lifetimes of, or the full flow of people engaging in it and then letting go and then something shifting. And I think there's still residual positive impacts, but you know, this isn't just a you know, going up kind of moment. You know, it's a going, you know, flow. You're getting stronger and then something happens and it's a setback in terms of what's going on. So that has been my experience in all of this work.
Well, it's kind of like saying you can't, to paraphrase a different quote, I think somebody said you can't have socialism in only one country. You can't have sociocracy and NVC in only one institution or only one organization. Ultimately, since we are embedded in the whole culture at large, yeah, all the systems need to reinforce each other or they won't. So the new executive director comes in and, you know, whatever you were doing is gone.
Right. Right. Well, there's realities, like they lost a few people, this one organization, they hired new people, they hit some economic hard times, they didn't have a chance to train new people, and so they decided we better let go of some of the stuff we've been doing and do it the way we all know how. So it's almost pragmatic at times, just kind of swaying with the winds. In particular, there needs to be a mindset shift underneath our structures and underneath our skills around NVC, because it's our mindset that carries it forward. And without the shifting mindset, ultimately these tools can be used to create harm the same way they could be used to create beautiful cultures. So.
Yeah, the trios between mindset, structures, and skills. That's a strong one. I would love to unpack with you overcoming hierarchy, also because people are starting to ask about it.
Yeah.
Do you want to unpack what it means to you?
Yeah. So I was thinking about overcoming hierarchy. I think I would prefer to say transforming hierarchy is the word that I would use. I think there's a sense when we experience the oppression maybe of a domination structure coming at us that we just want to get rid of it, excise it. But frankly, hierarchy is a beautiful way to get work done. A functional hierarchy is very potent, very powerful. I do not know a better way to get work done than a functional hierarchy. And by that, I mean there are clear roles, there are clear people leading, and by leading, they have the overall view of what's going on. So they're coordinating the various pieces that are happening, and there are people getting the work done that have skills to support the role that they have. That's absolutely beautiful. Let's not get rid of that. It does show up as a hierarchy. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And to me, it's not, even in sociocratic systems, there's still a hierarchy of power in sociocracy. So there's a top circle, whatever you're describing that is, a general circle, and lower level circles, assuming there's multiple circles. So it's not even the hierarchy of power that's the issue. To me, the issue is the localization of power within one human being, so that they have essentially absolute power, or close to absolute power, and they can make whatever decisions they want that impact those people that are below them in the chain of things. So so I don't think the issue lies in hierarchy. I think it lies in giving complete power to an individual. Absolute power, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we see that over and over and over again, that if you don't have to be accountable to your use of power, which is what absolute power means, I can do whatever I want and no one here will hold me accountable, then you get these bizarre, dysfunctional everything. Watch the news tonight and find all the absolute power going amok. And that's what sociocracy turns on its head. It changes the locus of power from the individual to the circle. And then the circle empowers the individuals. And that is what is important. That's how you get rid of power over. So you still have a CEO in a sociocratic business structure, but that CEO is empowered by the board, or the top circle equivalent of that, and by the general circle. And that power can be taken back, or given to someone else, or redistributed however the circles choose to do that. Everyone is ultimately accountable in a sociocratic process, structure, at least if the group is doing that. It takes work to do that, but the structure itself lends toward accountability and clarity of authority.
Yeah, well, but the phrase circular hierarchy that we use often with sociocracy, meaning yes, there is the operational top-down kind of hierarchy, but there's also the policy influencing bottom-up that is represented by the delegates, by the double linking, so that even the executive director winds up having to answer to one of the workers that's been chosen bottom-up to oversee the general direction of the work of the executive director of the organization.
Yeah. I'll just say quickly, an organization that is implementing a part of sociocracy, one way that businesses can do it. I'm working with an organization right now. It's a nursing care facility that that has chosen to create a policy circle within its organizations, and the CEO has empowered this policy circle to create a wide range of policies for the organization. And that there are representatives that have been elected from each of 4 departments, I think, that serve on that policy circle. And it's held in a truly sociocratic way. So even though they're not a sociocratic organization, they've decided to take just how they create general policies for their organization and create a policy circle to do it. And they love it. They love it. It was even unclear who created policies before. The authority to create policies, you know, you could always say, well, the CEO does, but as it turned out, he didn't create many. Most of them were inherited. A few directors just said, I created that policy without any clear authority to do so. So they now have clear authority. It's vested in that circle to change or create new policies there. So that's an example of where you can take a sociocratic structure, bring it into a tangible business without the whole organization going sociocratically. And that said, once they get used to that policy circle, it would be real easy to then make that a broader governance circle and to move more sociocratically from that, if they want to, if they choose to. Yeah.
This is how we run all of our businesses. I won't go into great detail about it, but everyone has full say in the business and I own the business, and everyone has my cell phone number. They can call me at any time. And that makes such a huge difference in how my company runs. And it runs so much better because they are free to tell me anything at all.
Mm-hmm. And I hear in what you're saying, Jane, that there has to be trust for that to happen as well. So they do tell you because they trust it, you want to hear it. And that there's not a negative consequence that's likely to happen of speaking truth to power. So
yeah, and especially if something has gone wrong.
Right.
Not hide anything from me, because I'll find it, and usually by the time I find it, it's really bad. But if you just come and tell me, we can take care of it. And yeah. I demonstrate that with them over and over again. You know, and it's not always easy. And it takes a great deal of patience and love for my employees, which I do.
Yeah. I enjoy hearing that. So I think at the root of all this is love. You know, it's strong care, how whatever words an organization is ready to hear, along with getting the work done. How can we bring love and purpose together as a way of working together toward the things that matter for us in this organization, in this group, what's happening?
I would like to ask you a question from the chat, and I would like to encourage other people to write their questions in the chat or indicate that you would like to ask something. So you can either, you know, speak or speak once we ask you, because we need to wait for a good moment. But good to put all the questions in the chat so we can sort of see what goes together with what. So one thing here is, Greg, do you always go to the CEO or ED to start your work with an organization, or could it? What are the entryways?
Right. So ideally go to the CEO or executive director, but I always go to the leader at the top level that's ready to do the work. So, and the leader must be on board, or I don't do anything with them. So if it is the CEO or the executive director, then we're working with the entire organization. If it's a different department where that leader is excited and wants to bring that in, then I'll work with that leader and his group. And perhaps seeing the results of that, maybe the CEO might be more enthusiastic about embracing it if they see the results are positive there. But at whatever level I work, I will only do the work if the leader of that group is enthusiastically supporting what's happening. It cannot happen otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody in a unit, somebody comes to you, then one of the first questions that you would have of them is, okay, I hear what your interest is. Who is the leader of your unit that needs to be supportive of this to make it work?
Right. And I would even say, so I'd be happy to talk to them. Who is that person that's the leader? Let's set up a call, and I call it a base camp call. Let's talk, and I would explore with him, you know, what's going on there? Why would you want you know, to work with a person such as myself? You know, what are the presenting situations? What are your goals? And, you know, would you be open to a project that would further those goals? So I see if they're ready to move into that and move forward. So I would be very much ready to have that conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, are there other sort of lessons learned of like, okay, I'm never gonna work with a group where or that, like, what is on your checklist of, for instance, I've had this question, we explored it recently. What do you do if you somehow feel that that even if you're talking, let's say, to the ED, but they're not completely sincere about really wanting to change things?
That they're not sincere, the ED? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
it sort of sounds like a good idea, you know, my NVC sounds like a good idea, having people feel more heard, but not really hearing them more. Like,
Right.
how do you go about that?
Well, it depends on if it ever gets off the ground. So ultimately, they'd have to agree to a work plan that would take it to a place where people would be heard, that this discovery process would happen, and things will come up and out, which frankly is an act of courage, especially for a leader. I'm working with the university right now, and the university just shared that he had talked to another university department chief, and the guy said, "My God, man, what are you doing this for? You know, you're just going to find out all kinds of stuff that isn't working, and it's going to look bad on you. Why are you doing it?" And so there is a moment of courage that says, I'm doing it because it matters, because I want that culture, because I'm willing to work toward that culture. And frankly, a culture is limited by its leaders. If the leaders aren't willing to step up, you cannot have a more advanced organizational culture than you have your leader has evolved to. Your leader must evolve with the culture. They cannot embrace something bigger than themselves. So it's really an invitation, and I'm clear about this in the conversation, that you, leader, are included in this process, and that in fact you, leader, are fundamental to whatever the new choices are. They will absolutely include you making some new choices about how you're leading. And are you open to that? Are you willing to embrace that? And of course, some of the saddest things I think I encounter, and I think this gets to your question as well, is the leader's not ready. And so we do a little bit and we stop because the leader's just not ready to go forward. Are the leaders pointing the finger out to everybody else? All of them need to change for this to work, without turning the finger back to themselves and saying, and so do I. So they're not willing to get on board with it.
Yeah, so there's that tension of those in power willing to share and those without power willing to step up. And both are tensions in the applications that
Right.
we're talking about.
And it's easy to be fearful from either side.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why I'm watching this is because I'm in a community in Seattle, Star Community, and we own houses together. We're an intentional living community.
Yeah.
And we're looking at buying another house, and we're also looking at how we're organizing our community. So my first question is, does the community need to have a central leader, do you think, in order for this to work? Can we do it without a central? Is it harder to implement without a central leader?
I think we need to define what a leader is, Jane, in the context of that. So for me, every group needs a leader. And I define a leader to be that person that's holding the whole. That is, somebody needs to be seeing how each piece fits in with the whole and is orchestrating the whole, the resources, the people, and things of that nature. So a leader looks different in this, but I believe a leader is fundamentally necessary, for groups that have a purpose, that want to carry out that purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's also a tendency, particularly in more NVC-like groups, of not only throw out the hierarchy, but let's throw out leaders too. You know, we're much better off without leaders. So, and I'm not in that court whatsoever.
We're really struggling with all of this so far because NVC is good, it's incorporating all of this in a way that really works. And what I experience from you being a leader is that what you do is exude the empathy and the willingness to lead. And that is what creates the culture. But that one person needs to be identified somewhat, or that person will arise naturally. I'm a little.
Well, in a sociocratic process, you'd have probably a leadership group of some kind. So you have everybody in the community, but so somebody needs to do the business of the community. So you elect people to be the core, the executive committee, whatever it's called. And then the executive committee, they would then select a leader to kind of hold that committee and potentially hold the entire organization, as it were. The power for that leader comes through the circles, right? So they can shift or change that. So it's not your typical leader. It's not a boss. It's someone in that role. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that is involved in being a leader. That is, how does a collective hold itself together? So I believe things such as shared values, core values, shared purpose need to be created in a way that the group consents to. And then you have the beginnings of a structure that the leader is reminding people, remember our core values. Let's act in concert with that. Remember our shared purpose. Help me understand how what you're describing right now fits our shared purpose. That's the goal of the leader. One of the big things is to keep reminding people of the things that the group has consented to matters as guideposts to how you get work done. So
can I add one more thing in there, and then I won't take so much more attention, but just another question is, part of our group really stands behind possibility management. And the other part stands, and I don't know if you're familiar with that system, and then the other part stands behind nonviolent communication. And it's like people feel like they have to pick an either or. And I'd like to find a way to bring it together.
So I'll just express this in a general term. Very often when I'm working with an organization, you end up with these, what I'll call them, structural conflicts. Some group of people are pulling the organization this way and another group of people are pulling them that way. Well, you need to identify the structural conflict, which you have in what you've just stated, and you need to come and address it. So, and that's some kind of a conversation around it. And structures are just strategies. NVC is a strategy. Sociocracy is a strategy. What are you trying to create? So what are the needs behind the strategies that you're creating? So you need to connect amidst that and then make some decisions. But keep in mind, the only way you can make decisions is if there's a core governance structure. Fundamentally, for an organization to exist, there has to be a clear governance structure. It's one of the fundamental qualities that if that's not defined, you will not go anywhere. So, and that will be some level of consent or agreement around what that core governance structure. It's usually in your bylaws. It's usually legally established in some way. Legally recognized group.
Is there going to be a copy available of this meeting today?
Yes, this is recorded, so it will be available. And I just wanted to add to Greg what you just was saying. You need a structure, and that structure needs to have a clear aim that has some buy-in by the people in that structure. Otherwise, you might need to split up and to have two different communities or two different businesses if they're following different aims. I think there were some other questions out there that we want to be able to hear from.
Discovery. Are there discovery or value assessment tools that you use, Greg, that you would be willing to share or mention here?
Yeah, I work with the Barrett Values Center tools. It's an international organization. They were originally in England, though they have a lot of offices here in the US, but worldwide. So all they do is create assessments around what they call values, but are going to look suspiciously like needs for those of us in an NVC realm. So what they call values are on par with needs, human needs. So I find them to be very simple and potent tools. I use two of theirs quite frequently. One's called the Cultural Values Assessment. That's the one I described at the beginning of this conversation. Another called the Leadership Values Assessment assesses, it's a 360 sort of evaluation, assessment of leadership. So in a very similar structure. But what I like about them, all my work is needs-based. So I need needs-based assessments. I'm interested in people seeing things through needs and describing them through needs. And these assessments make that much more powerful.
Sally, I see you unmuted. I was just wondering whether that was intentional, because I can't mute it. Okay. Doesn't look like it. Or did you have a question? I wanted to have.
Yeah, you can. I was just going to make a comment. You know, I really like what you said at the beginning, Greg, about the visible behavior.
Yes.
Because I went to a conference once. I remember, you know, it was a very striking presentation where somebody showed us a list of incredibly beautifully stated values, and then told us what the company was, and it was Enron.
Yeah.
The epitome of not acting on, you know, human values. So it's how do you make those values, you know, real in the work?
Right. I often use the word embodied, and I mean that literally in two senses, that it should be embodied in the structures and processes that people use every day in the organization, and it needs to be embodied in the individuals that are living in that organization. So we need to live mutual respect. It needs to ooze from us. And you ought to be able to point out, I'll show you where mutual respect shows up in our policies and procedures. It shows up in our meetings, because in meetings, we have this kind of structure that ensures everyone is included in the meeting, or whatever it is. But unless you can literally point out explicitly where the values live in the organization, then they're just floaty words on the page. So I use the word embodied in its very fullest sense, and that we're always moving towards that. So I want to talk about behaviors in alignment with mutual respect. What do they look like? Our situation, how do we live mutual respect in this situation when it shows up? How do you live mutual respect when one of your colleagues is angry and is shouting at you? What does mutual respect look like? How can you bring it into that picture? So those are the challenges to me that get it to an embodied place. And that's the work that goes on to evolve and develop culture. So the words are not enough. It's the energized state of being that we're after, and the energized structures that have it within them.
Here's another question, and that is, what's typically, out of governance, what's the first, now that's probably, you've sort of already said it, that it's probably very different depending on the organization, but what is the first tool that you see stick, or that you see make a difference? You mentioned rounds earlier. That's one thing. Is there something else you would like to mention there?
Well, it depends. So if I step back, I'm going to step back from the sociocratic process and just say, so if I'm working with an organization, what's the most fundamental things for that organization to move forward in this realm that might be the sociocratic process? But the first things that have to be there, they're around identity of the organization. And I've named I've named both of these, but I'll put it in the context. If they don't have a clear core governance structure, this gets to what Jane was saying, that must exist, because they don't exist. They have no identity if there's not a core governance structure. So that has to be there. And I've hit a couple of organizations where that wasn't. And so we just need to work on this until you have that beginnings, because you really don't even exist without that. You're just a group of people with some idea. And then the next thing, I want core values. That's the other part of the identity that is so key. So are there clear core values? And core values mean that people are aligned around those. So that's very often an initial process, and a shared purpose. Those are fundamental, energizing, I call them the heart implant of organizations. I used to say transplant, but a lot of organizations don't have hearts. So I now call it the implant. That is fundamentally The shift is from extrinsic motivation around rewards and punishment to intrinsic motivation, which means there's something fundamentally that we all align around that motivates us to want to do our work. And the core values and the shared purpose are the cornerstones, the beginnings of what that looks like. And they need to be energizing. That is, whatever we come up with needs to say, wow, yeah, I want to be a part of that organization. I want to work there. Wow, that culture is where I want to be. That purpose matters to me. I want to be a part of it. I want to make it happen. So we need the visceral, energetic connection to those qualities to shift toward intrinsic motivation. And that's one of the biggest fundamental shifts between the old organization and the new. It needs a heart, and this is the heart. And then you spend your energy around, so how do we make this real? Here's our shared purpose, here's our core values. How do we build it into what we do? How do we make it happen? How do we realize it in our day-to-day work and how we serve our clients, whatever that looks like? So it gives you the guidepost. And people can act a lot more autonomously when they're intrinsically motivated with guideposts. And so they can be much more what sociocracy demands, and that is you need autonomous individuals working with an aligning force. You need the aligning force, or people just do whatever, and you need autonomous people that can make choices around it. So it's just a reality. And the stronger you stoke the aligning forces, the more potent is that living organization, right? And I'll say something around a crisis, a hurricane hits, you have disaster, you have an aligning force around the care of the survivors of that hurricane. And so people who don't even know each other come and take care of things. And what we want is a similar kind of find that quality of energy within our organization that aligns us day after day after day to carry forward. This is important stuff. It's good stuff.
Yes.
If we want to create living organizations, this is the material that we make them from.
I've been reading Christopher Moore's book called Gandhian Iceberg. So some of what you're saying is reminding me of what's in there. The alignment around purpose, which allows a group of volunteers to have a tremendous impact on society if they are so organized around purpose, even though they're not getting paid for all their time. And what it means for a for-profit organization to be aligned around purpose, which means if they are truly from the heart, they're going to reflect on what is it that they are producing and shift to more life-serving products and services than whatever they might be doing at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, and this gets back to something I said earlier, for me, this is deeply spiritual work.
Yeah.
And I can't separate it from that. But I don't bring it in as spiritual work. Or let me rephrase that. I don't have to name it as spiritual work. I don't have to call it out. I don't have to use spiritual words or anything about that. But what I do know is that when people touch into human needs in whatever way they do it, they will experience something that they're going to have to come to terms with. I come to terms with it in a spiritual way. But whatever it is, it leads people to something that is much more humane, much more connected, much more enlivening than what we've experienced before. So what I love about working in workplaces is I can talk about accountability. I can talk about, giving feedback. And for me, everything I talk about is deep spiritual work around how people engage with one another. I can talk about sociocracy. I can talk about rounds. And to me, the beauty is this thing of inclusion, how, incredibly human it is when we include people and they have a sense of belonging and that they matter. So I guess I just want that depth of the work to be seen, even though at times we're only working at the next step that client or that person is ready to take. It's still a step into that kind of quality of I don't know, being alive, of engaging with each other.
Mhm.
And that to me really fuels so much.
Yeah. How
Again,
each of us show up in the world.
yeah. And how we can show up and what our potential is when we show up in a particular way with each other and what can happen in that space. To me, all of this work is about enlivening a potential that we can't even see yet, but keeps emerging the more we do this kind of work. You know, we begin to see the edge of a little bit more distant edge of the potential of what we can do when we engage with each other this way.
We are getting ready to wrap up here. So we're looking for any final words.
From Greg.
Greg, any final words from
And
you?
hold on, before you do that, let me say that we have the tradition of then do a formal closing so people can go without feeling bad, and then we always stay on. And I hope, Greg, you have some time too to stay on. And then we sort of shift into a more informal situation, and we'll stop recording and so on. So after your final words, I'm going to unmute everybody. We can wave bye-bye, and that is the formal closing. Okay?
Good. Well, I have no better final words than what I just said a moment ago. So I'll leave on that note. And I am willing to stay if other people want to engage. I since there's some unanswered questions, I'm happy to engage with people as they would want to, those that want to stay.
Terrific. So I'm warning you that I'm going to say unmute all, and that's our little ritual here. Unmute all, and then wave and say bye-bye. You can also start the video for that. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Now I'm going to mute all.
Thank you. Thank you.